ever stopped to think about why we even have last names? I mean, really think about it.
It's such a fundamental part of how we identify ourselves, isn't it? But yeah, it wasn't always this way.
Exactly. And your last name, it carries these echoes of the past like a story woven through generations across continents. Welcome to Study Hall and our segment, But Why Though? Today, we're diving deep, really exploring the origins and evolution of surnames.
How did these family identifiers pop up? Why did they stick?
Right. And what secrets do they spill about the societies that, birthed them?
It's a real journey through history we've got lined up. We're looking at everything, ancient Chinese clans, medieval European villages.
Even how colonial rule messed with naming practices.
Exactly. Our mission today, uncover that surprising path from just simple names to the family names we all have now.
Get ready for some aha moments, I think.
Definitely.
And if you're someone who loves connecting those dots, who wonders about the big picture behind everyday stuff, well, you're in the right place.
We'll break down the key developments, clearly, hopefully engagingly.
Packed with interesting details, but, not overwhelmingly so. Think of this as your personal deep dive into the story hidden in your own name.
So where do we kick this off?
Okay, so where does this incredible story begin? It seems like our earliest sort of solid clues point east towards ancient China.
That's right. Yeah, the evidence really points strongly towards China having developed the earliest known hereditary surname system. We're talking way back.
How far back?
Roots stretching back to the Shang dynasty. That's the 2nd millennium BCE.
Wow, okay, so like 3,500 years ago, give or take.
Very much. And what's really interesting is how tied in this was with their society, their structure.
How so?
Well, these were large clan-based societies, right?
Sure.
And having stable lineage names became, well, essential for identity and maybe even more importantly for managing inheritance within these big, complex kinship groups.
So it wasn't just, hi, I'm Wang. It was more like, I belong to the Wang clan, and here's how inheritance works. More functional.
Precisely. More than just a label, it was a cornerstone of how their society functioned, almost like a social security number, like you said, but with centuries of history baked right in.
Okay, that makes sense.
They already had practices using inherited clan names. Those were the Sung and branch names, the Shi. The formal surname system just kind of built on that foundation.
So it evolved naturally from existing customs.
It seems so. It became a vital tool for navigating their world, which was very family-centric. And get this, the origins of these early Chinese surnames were incredibly varied.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
They could come from dynasty names, clan names, sure, but also nobility ranks, names of states, official jobs.
Jobs, like Smith or Baker.
Kind of, yeah. Also, where people lived, what work they did, sometimes even significant historical events.
That's amazing. A genealogical goldmine right there in the name. Imagine knowing your ancestor thousands of years ago was, I don't know, the Duke's record keeper or lived by the Yellow River just from your surname.
It paints a picture, doesn't it? And the sources really highlight how overwhelmingly patrilineal it was, passed down the father's line,
Right.
and the incredible continuity. This system has lasted for millennia in many Chinese communities.
That's staggering longevity.
Absolutely. They even had the 8 great Sings of high antiquity, directly linked to the Shangzhou nobility. Your name instantly signaled your social rank.
So deeply embedded in the social fabric right from the start, almost like a permanent marker.
Exactly. Which is quite different from how things developed later in Europe, where social mobility maybe played a bigger role in how names changed or spread.
It's fascinating that other big early civilizations, Indus Valley, Mesopotamia, Egypt, they didn't seem to develop such a widespread hereditary system quite as early as China.
No, it really puts China in a unique position there.
Okay, let's travel west then. Mediterranean, Europe. What was happening there in the ancient world? Did they have surnames?
Well, yes and no. Around the 1st millennium BCE, the Romans had a pretty structured system. You've probably heard of it, the trianomina. 3 names.
Like Gaius Julius Caesar.
Exactly. Praesomen, that was the personal name, Gaius.
Yeah.
Nomen, the clan name, Julius. And cognomen, a family branch, or sometimes a nickname, Caesar. It definitely emphasized lineage.
Okay, so that sounds kind of like a surname, the nomen part anyway. Did that just stick around and become modern European names?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But here's the twist.
Uh-oh.
That whole trianomina system, it largely disappeared in Western Europe after the Western Roman Empire collapsed in the 5th century CE.
Really? Just gone?
Pretty much, yeah. Outside of maybe some aristocratic circles clinging to tradition, it didn't really persist. The upheaval, the migrations, things changed.
So what did people do instead? Just first names?
Mostly, yeah. People reverted to simpler naming, often just a single personal name, maybe combined with a descriptive nickname or location marker.
Yep.
But, and this is key, it wasn't usually hereditary.
Ah, okay. So you might be John at the Woods or William the Black.
Exactly. William the Black, because maybe he had dark hair.
But his kids wouldn't automatically be called Black.
Nope, not necessarily. It was about him. These were epithets, specific to the individual. They could change. They weren't passed down systematically.
So the Roman system, despite seeming structured, left basically no direct legacy for modern European surnames.
Surprisingly little, yes. It was almost like hitting the reset button on naming conventions centuries later.
Wow. Imagine the confusion. Which John do you mean? You know John, the tall one.
Must have happened all the time, which probably helped drive the need for something more permanent later on.
A naming do-over. Okay, so Europe eventually gets back to fixed surnames. How did that happen? It sounds like a rediscovery and reinvention, as some historians put it.
That's a good way to put it. Starting in the early Middle Ages, maybe around the 5th century CE, but really picking up steam between the 10th and 13th centuries, fixed surnames started to reemerge.
And why then? What changed?
Different drivers than ancient China. Primarily, population growth, more people around. And societies were becoming a bit more stable, especially after big events like the Norman conquest of England in 1066.
Right. More people, more complex administration needed. You need better labels.
Exactly. You need more precise ways to tell people and families apart. For records, for land ownership, for taxes.
You mentioned the Normans. Did they play a big role in England?
Huge. They were a major catalyst there. They brought their own naming customs, which included patronymics using Fitz, meaning son of, like Fitzwilliam.
Ah, Fitzwilliam Darcy.
See? And also toponymics names based on place, often using de la, meaning of the, like de la Roche.
Okay.
So in England, hereditary surnames started catching on among the nobility by the 12th century. Then it gradually spread. By the end of the 13th century, most families, even peasants, had them.
Out of practical necessity, basically.
Pretty much. And you see similar patterns across Europe.
Mm-hmm.
France, Italy, Spain, the German states. Local lords, notaries, they start recording families with these shared, inherited names.
So we're seeing the bedrock of the European surname system being laid. What kinds of names were popping up? What are the main categories?
The sources point to 4 main types, which are really interesting when you break them down. First, patronymics, the son of names.
Like Johnson, son of John.
The classic English example. You see it everywhere. Hansen in Scandinavia, Ivanov in Russia, MacGregor in Scotland, Mac, also meaning son of. It shows how common it was to identify someone through their father.
Makes sense. What's next?
Second, occupational names, based on what people did.
Smith, Miller, Baker, Carpenter.
Exactly. Those are super common in English, but you find them everywhere. Schneider is tailor in German, Lefebvre is smith in French, Ferrari in Italian is related to ironworking or blacksmithing.
Imagine being called Ferrari today, though maybe not that Ferrari.
Probably not. But yeah, your family name could literally tell everyone your ancestors' trade for generations.
That's a direct link. Okay, number 3.
Toponymic names, based on location where people lived or came from.
Hill, wood, fields. Pretty straightforward.
Yep. Or maybe a specific town. William of York eventually just becomes William York. You also get things like Van Eyck in Dutch, meaning from the oak forest, or Deschamps in French, from the fields.
So it could be a landmark, a town, a region.
Any geographic feature, really. And the last main category, nicknames or descriptive names.
Ah, like William the Black we mentioned earlier, but becoming permanent.
Exactly. Based on personal characteristics. Maybe hair color, LeBlanc in French, Rossi or Russo red in Italian. Maybe temperament. Maybe Armstrong started with someone known for physical strength. Or origin Greco, suggesting someone with Greek roots.
It's like these names were snapshots of a person or their family's life, their job, where they lived, what they looked like.
Pretty much. Very practical origins for something that became so ingrained as family identity.
But how did they go from being somewhat fluid descriptions or locations to being absolutely fixed, passed down unchanged? That seems like a big step.
It was. And that's where institutions really step in.
Yeah.
The church played a massive role.
How so?
Yeah.
Record keeping.
Precisely. In England, for instance, 1538 was a key date. The Church of England ordered parishes to keep registers of baptisms, marriages, and burials.
Ah, so when you record a baptism, you write down the parents' names, and suddenly you're linking a child to a specific family name consistently.
Exactly. These registers, by listing families together under a shared name time after time, effectively solidified hereditary surname use by the 16th century.
And the Catholic Church.
Similar story. The Council of Trent, mid-16th century, also mandated parish registers across Catholic Europe. It wasn't maybe explicitly about surnames, but the effect was the same, promoting surname inheritance as families were consistently recorded together.
So church bureaucracy, in a way, locked these names down. What about the government, the state?
They definitely got involved too, increasingly so over time. The state's role becomes really direct in the more modern era. Think about Napoleon.
Okay, what did he do?
Early 19th century, Napoleon's civil code was implemented across his empire, and it mandated that every citizen had to have a fixed, unchanging family name for administrative purposes.
Right, makes sense for a centralized state. Where did that have a big impact?
Places like the Netherlands, parts of Italy, various German states, people who didn't have a fixed surname or whose names changed generationally were required to register a permanent one.
Forced naming, almost.
In a way, yes. Then throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, you see more laws across Europe solidifying this. German states required everyone, including Jewish communities who often had different naming traditions, to adopt permanent German-style surnames. Scandinavian countries officially phased out their traditional patronymic systems where the surname changed each generation. Sven Andersson's son would be Olaf Svensson.
Right, they made everyone pick a name and stick with it.
Exactly. It became legally fixed.
So a real mix of church and state power formalizing things. But we've been very Eurocentric lately, apart from our start in China. How did fixed surnames take root elsewhere? Japan, the Middle East, South Asia, Africa. Was it a similar story?
It's a crucial part of the global picture, and often the story involves state influence, sometimes quite directly, often through colonial administration. It wasn't always an organic internal development like in early China or medieval Europe.
Okay, give us an example. Japan.
Japan's interesting. Fixed hereditary surnames for everyone are relatively recent there. During the Meiji Restoration in the late 19th century, a period of rapid modernization, the government made surname use mandatory.
Mandatory when?
Commodores were allowed to adopt surnames in 1870, and by 1875, everyone had to register a family name. Before that, most ordinary people didn't have them.
Wow, that is recent. What about the Middle East? I know traditional naming there could be quite different, very long lineage names sometimes.
Exactly. Traditionally, naming was often fluid. You'd have your personal name, then maybe son of father's name, maybe son of grandfather's name, changing each generation. Plus, often a nisba indicating origin, tribe, profession. Fixed hereditary surnames weren't the norm.
So what changed?
The rise of modern states, mostly in the 20th century, they needed standardized records. Turkey's surname law of 1934 is a prime example, mandated heritable family surnames for all citizens. Ataturk himself took the name meaning father of the Turks. Persia, now Iran, did something similar in the 1920s and 30s.
So again, the government stepping in for administrative reasons. Everyone needs a last name for our files.
Pretty much, yeah. Often tied to nation building, conscription, taxation, voting rolls, and South Asia. Similar themes, heavily influenced by the British.
How did the British influence it?
The colonial administration needed fixed names for their bureaucracy, for censuses, for land records. They often took existing identifiers, caste names, community names, village names, and recorded them as family names.
I mean, that stuck.
Over time, yes. People started using these recorded names as hereditary surnames. Think of names like Sharma, Patel, Gupta, Khan. Many became solidified as family names during this period, even if their origins were more complex.
Right. And Africa.
Yep.
Huge diversity there, obviously.
Immense diversity in pre-colonial naming practices.
Yeah.
Many societies didn't use hereditary family names in the European way. Names often had deep cultural meanings, linked to circumstances of birth, lineage, status. They could change over a lifetime.
So how did the European-style surname system spread?
Largely through colonial administrations and missionary schools. They needed names for their records, for school enrollment, tax rolls, so they often imposed a first-name, last-name format.
What did people do? Did they adopt European names?
Sometimes, yes, or existing traditional names or patronymics or clan names might get formalized and fixed as a surname. By the time many African nations gained independence in the mid to late 20th century, the surname system was largely entrenched as part of the legal identity framework, often a direct legacy of those colonial structures.
It's really striking how often the spread and formalization outside China and Europe seems tied to state power, often colonial power. Surnames weren't just cultural drift, they were tools of governance.
Absolutely, which ties into how surnames reflect social structures more broadly.
Right, you mentioned that earlier. Can you unpack that a bit more? How do they act as social fingerprints?
Well, the most obvious way is lineage and ancestry. The dominance of patrilineal systems worldwide tells you a lot about historical inheritance patterns and social focus. Chinese clan names, European patronymics. It's all about tracing the father's line, usually.
Okay, what else?
They can also link to broader identities. Ethnic origin, cultural background, sometimes religion. Certain Chinese surnames are strongly linked to Han identity. Some South Asian names connect to caste. Certain African surnames might indicate a specific ethnic group.
So your name can be a clue to your ancestral group or community, like a subtle social marker passed down.
Exactly. And they reflect historical structures that might not exist anymore or not in the same way. Occupational names like Smith or Baker tell you about past economies and social roles. Toponymic names link families to places, maybe indicating land ownership or origin.
We talked about rank in China, too.
Right, and in some other societies as well. Certain names carried status. And then, as we discussed, the very act of formalizing surnames reflects the rise of state administration. But it's not just historical structures.
The temporary ones, too.
Yeah, look at gender norms. Historically, the widespread practice of wives taking husbands' names was linked to legal ideas like coverture, where a woman's legal identity merged with her husband's.
That's changed a lot, though.
It has, significantly. Feminist movements have driven changes, women retaining birth names, hyphenation becoming common, and laws are adapting too. Spain lets parents choose the order of surnames for their children. Iceland even allows matronymics names derived from the mother's name more easily now.
So it's still evolving. It's not a static system.
Definitely not. And migration adds another whole layer of complexity and dynamism.
How does migration impact surnames?
In multiple ways. On one hand, surnames become really important cultural anchors for diaspora communities. Someone in, say, Canada with an Italian surname feels that connection back. Sometimes people even research and reclaim ancestral names that were lost or changed during migration.
As a way to reconnect with heritage.
Exactly. But migration also leads to new naming conventions. Intermarriage in multicultural societies creates blended or hyphenated names. You see Garcia Smith or Chen Miller. It reflects the merging of families and cultures.
And legal systems have to catch up with that, too.
They often do, adapting to accommodate these new patterns. It shows how names continue to reflect our changing social reality.
Wow. So from, ancient Chinese clans needing to track lineage, all the way to modern digital databases and hyphenated names reflecting global movement, surnames have had quite the journey.
They really have.
Who knew your last name wasn't just a label, but this mini history book etched onto your identity? It's almost funny how something we take for granted has such deep, complex, and sometimes surprising roots.
Absolutely. Hopefully this whole deep dive has given you, our listeners, a new appreciation for the story behind your own name, and maybe the names you hear every day.
Yeah, it's a great reminder that even the most familiar things often have these incredibly fascinating origins just waiting there to be explored.
Makes you look at the phone book differently. Or, well, your contacts list now.
Totally. Now here's something to chew on. Knowing this history, how do you think surnames might evolve next? In our super interconnected, maybe increasingly gender-neutral world?
Good question. Will blended names become the standard? Will we see totally new ways of naming emerge? Digital identities, perhaps?
Who knows? Maybe take a moment, dig into the history of your surname. You might be really surprised at the "but why though" answers you find.
It's a great personal history project.
Definitely. Until our next exploration here at Study Hall.